Welcome back, everyone, to the top four of the 2016 Central Texas X-Wing Miniatures Regional Final Elimination Matches. Again, this is the top four match. Our top of the board player, Dan, for the third round on the top table, now facing Mark, a community favorite, member of Scum and Villainy, Sable Griffin Fletcher, flying his well-known worlds list of 3 Warden Squadron pilots, absolutely loaded to the gills with cluster munitions, bombs, and designed to cause as much havoc as possible for any opponent on the table. We see Dan setting up in his very common arrangement, preparing Riyadh and the shuttle in a corner. Mark setting up to face off directly between a series of obstacles on the bottom half of the table, with a straight approach right into the jaws of Dan's list. Mark, absolutely no stranger to this kind of a list matchup, having dispatched many defenders on his play both at Worlds and here over the past 2 days at the regional competition. Dan, on the other hand, not as familiar facing a bomb-heavy list like this. Will have to learn on his feet, dealing with the sheer amount of ordnance that Mark can bring to bear. And there's the handshake. The clock has already started. The beginning of turn 1. 71 minutes remaining on the clock. Dials being placed. I think we can safely assume a gradual approach coming from Mark here, looking to take as much advantage as possible of the obstacles currently on the board, able to lock those down effectively with good cluster mine placement. Interestingly enough, Mark choosing a slam from the first maneuver on his outside K-wing, bringing this whole formation, making a left turn with a fulcrum on the left side of the table. Dan coming out of the gates fast. Riyadh at full speed, moving straight in to the circling K-wings. Riyadh checking range for target locks, finding none available. Vessery coming in high speed as well. Making an attempt to pinch her in on those approaching Warden pilots. Vessery preparing himself next turn to come in around that asteroid. And back to dials. Turn 2, 69 minutes remaining on the clock. Dial's now set. Dan weighing his options. Shuttle moving down the left side of the table. As we've seen Dan do before, just keeping a nice, even, predictable flight path for that shuttle. Sable continuing to close the jaws on this formation of Y-wings. K-wings, I should say. Created quite the trap in positioning for both the shuttle and for Riyadh to fly into. The relatively weak turret power of these K-wings not lending themselves to much of a threat against these Imperial fighters. However, the threat of their ordnance, very real, and something that Dan is absolutely going to have to be mindful of as he executes these maneuvers. Making a 3-turn with Riyadh into a bump, still getting that evade token courtesy of the X7 title. Vessery doing the same as well, turning into the fight and attempting to get into range to begin engaging. Dan continuing to figure out what action he's going to take. Choosing to take a focus. Bit of bumping there. Shuttle looking for a shot against the K-wing closest to it. Looks like it's inside range 2, just barely. First shot of the game coming from the shuttle. Two hits and a blank, naturally on the dice. Strong opening roll that we've come to expect to see from Dan. Using Palpatine to bring a crit in. Looks like 1 of 8 on the dice. Stripping shields from the lead K-wing. K-wing in the rear, engaging range 3 with its primary turret for 1 hit and a crit against Riyadh. Riyadh coming up with full evades. Shot. 1 hit and a crit. 2 focus and an evade. Token spent, no hit driven through against Riyadh. And we're back to dials again. Turn 3, 62 minutes on the board. Dan now looking to capitalize on both Riyadh and Vessery's positioning. Trying to get a shot on the already damaged K-Wing, now currently bumping Riyadh. The shuttle moving slowly forward. Mark using Intel Agent against Riyadh to get a sense of the maneuver. Another advantage to Riyadh, not having to decide whether to convert a straight into a K-turn until the time the maneuver is revealed. Certainly giving him a bit more of an advantage when his maneuver is peaked at early. K-Wing moving forward, bumping directly into the shuttle. Now activating the rearmost with a 3 bank. Choosing to slam. Moving directly into the locations where the defenders will be moving. Perhaps hoping for a block against Riyadh. With us unable to see the revealed maneuver, we're not sure what Riyadh has planned just yet. The damaged K-Wing banking away from the fight in an excellent position to potentially drop ordnance, and here it comes. Quite likely to be the first of the cluster bombs dropped on the table. The drop itself landing directly on Riyadh, as well as the rightmost piece of the cluster. Riyadh taking 2 hits from cluster bombs. Here come the rolls. 1 crit for the first cluster. One shield. And the second cluster. All in all, a pretty good result of those cluster mines for Riyadh, taking 2 shields courtesy of Sabine. And there we see the block. Mark maneuvering the K-Wing into position to stop Riyadh's maneuver. Vessery with the 3 forward, gaining his token, being able to stack up, and being set up for a range 1 shot against this rightmost undamaged Warden Squadron pilot. Here comes the attack from Vessery, range 1. Hitting a crit on the die. Palpatine for a crit. For 2 hits, 2 crits. Spend the focus for the evade. Losing shields in the arrangement. A strong opening attack from Vessery. The unfortunate reality of K-Wings that with as much hull and shields as they bring to bear, even a strong attack like that is still just a drop in the bucket for this list. Attack from two shields down. Warden attacking Riyadh, range 2. 1 hit. Spending the token, avoiding the hit. Another range 2 shot coming from the Wardens. No pain on that one. And we're back to dials. Turn 4, 55 minutes on the clock. So a chaotic situation here on the table. Certainly something that Mark can take strong advantage of. Being well positioned to place cluster ordnance both against the shuttle and potentially against the defenders as well. The more bumping and confusion that Mark can cause as he moves his K-Wings through these close-range engagements, the more favorable this is to force Dan to fly into positions where that ordnance can be used most effectively. As we've already seen demonstrated, Mark is comfortable enough with this list to drop ordnance close to his own ships only for an effect that he's looking for against an enemy ship. Warden moving forward. Again, potentially looking at placement of ordnance here. Choosing instead to do a hard 2-turn to the right with slam. Now bringing the ordnance to bear. Placing cluster mines directly along the movement path of Riyadh. Well, he may only get one hit on Riyadh from something like this. What he's done an effective job of is denying this lane, forcing Riyadh to spend at least one turn, if not more, turning off of that lane before coming back into the fight. Next K-Wing jumping over the top of the shuttle and dropping munitions. Being clear to both players that there's no way to avoid that, they've chosen simply to roll off on the munitions themselves. To focus on the result there.
Yeah, I bumped it, sorry.
Coming up once again, managing to avoid a pretty substantial number of hits there. Now opting for a seismic charge to catch the shuttle with at least some guaranteed damage out of this ordnance. Riyadh now barreling over all 3 cluster mines dropped by that outermost K-Wing. Not what Dan wants to see here. Here come the rolls once again. There's one hit from the first of the clusters. One hit from the next of the clusters. And 2 hits from the last. Sabine opting to splash that damage onto Vessery rather than stacking it up on Riyadh. There goes the damage. And Riyadh is now off the table, having been dispatched by the cluster mines. Vessery turning in to try and continue firing at the already damaged K-Wing. Seismic charge detonating, dealing an additional damage to the shuttle. Another shield gone there. Vessery now engaging the damaged K-Wing. 2 hits on the dice. Choosing to spend the focus. 1 focused evade for the K-Wing, taking 2 damage on the hull. Shuttle finding a range 3 shot at the same damaged K-Wing. 1 hit on the dice. 1 evade on the dice. No effect there. K-Wing firing range 1 from its primary turret. No hits, no tokens. Range 3 against the shuttle. 2 natural hits on the die. 1 evade and a focus. 1 shield lost in the exchange. And that's the end of the turn. We are back to dials. 47 minutes left on the clock. So, going into the next turn, very likely that we're going to see potentially another cluster mine drop directly onto the shuttle, courtesy of the topmost K-Wing. Vessery will continue to attempt to engage the already damaged Warden pilot in the hopes of eliminating that particular intel agent from play, certainly making it far easier to avoid taking those hits. As of the current board state for Dan, Shuttle with 1 shield remaining, Vessery with 2 shields remaining. Warden pilots, 3 hull remaining on Warden number 1, untouched on number 2, and 1 shield remaining on number 3. Vessery having been checked by the intel agent, doing a 4K maneuver this round. Mark now weighing his options for how to capitalize on that maneuver. Shuttle flying over yet another cluster mine on the table. There's a roll, hitting a crit on the shuttle. Shuttle choosing to lose the final shield and take 1 damage against the hull. Cluster mines do not resolve critical effects, taking only a face down card. Target locking the intel agent Warden. Dan now attempting to take an inventory of exactly how many bombs remain to be dropped on him. Mark opening the round with a 2 turn coming from the damaged intel agent Warden. More clusters coming from the damaged Warden, looking to empty out those bomb bays before it gets shot down. Another 2-turn from the uppermost Warden, taking a target lock against the shuttle. And another 2-hard turn. And now having effectively blocked Vessery, potentially triggering 2. Looks like they have determined that those 2 will be the ones which are hit. Vessery then getting bumped, unable to complete that maneuver. And the roll for the cluster bombs. We have 1 hit and 1 focus. Another shield down off of Vessery. Looks like a crit result at least. And a hit as well. Dan considering his options. Palpatine still available to change those dice in his favor a bit. Dan again carefully considering. Palpatine reducing the damage after all. Vessery taking 1 shield and 1 hull damage. 2 hull remaining on Vessery.
You're absolutely right, because there's something you're not considering. Next turn I can run into that and just do it. You will get stripped because of the time. You will be, because I move first. You just saved Vessery. Right? Uh-huh. You're welcome.
Mark and Dan discussing the same thing that was mentioned in the comments. Dan having chosen to Palpatine away one of the results, giving Vessery 2 hull remaining. Mark commenting that he was no longer able to run over his own mine to trigger Sabine for the kill during the next turn. Attack coming out from the shuttle, wiping the intel agent K-Wing off the table. No longer a factor for Dan to deal with. Now, he still has a lot of ordnance on the table that he needs to compensate for. we're no longer
Range 3.
going to see those meticulously planned
2 hits.
placements of ordnance.
Okay. And then you've got no token.
K-Wing now engaging Vessery. 2 hits trying to close this out with its primary weapon turret. Vessery blanking out right when he needed it most. No Palpatine, no tokens, getting shot down by the K-Wing's primary guns. Now going back to dials, moving on to the next turn. 37 minutes remaining on the clock.
I noticed that. The best. First. I may have given that to you for a reason. Go. I don't have intel agent, so I can't see it first.
Shuttle now opening the maneuvers. Choosing to stop. K-Wing running over its own cluster mine. Rolling in a hit for that. Shuttle out of range of the Sabine effect. K-Wing choosing to slam forward into the shuttle, denying the shot. Solid plan by Mark. Topmost K-Wing, 2 turning into the fight, electing to take a focus. Now checking for shots.
Illegal play. Yes, I'll give that as a. Can I jump into the redemption? Yeah, certainly.
Checking for obstruction on the shuttle. Spending the focus for 2 hits from the K-Wing's primary turret. 2 evades natural on the dice.
No reason not to.
No hits on the shuttle. Back to dials again. Starting the next turn. 34 minutes on the clock. Shuttle now moving clear of the K-Wing. Very likely to see some more ordnance drop this turn as the shuttle finds itself in the unenviable position of being behind those bomb bay doors. K-Wing choosing not to drop a seismic charge on the maneuver, opting simply for a focus. Topmost K-Wing moving forward. Not bumping its companion. Getting some well-practiced maneuvering on the part of these K-Wings. And turret shots coming in from the K-Wings with a hit and a crit. 1 evade result. Damage cockpit turned up against the shuttle as the crit. Largely irrelevant at this point. One hit coming. One hit and a crit now delivered by this K-Wing against the shuttle. Now having taken a major hull breach, all damage cards going forward face up for the shuttle. That is one that Dan did not want to see. Although at this point, it may simply be insult to injury with no effective fighting tools left in Dan's squadron.
You move first now.
The shuttle now deciding to get the hell out of Dodge, plowing through debris, taking a red maneuver. Simply trying to get as far away from these K-Wings as possible. K-Wings continuing their pursuit. Taking a focus to continue primary weapons fire.
Right.
Range 3 shot coming from the weapons-free K-Wing. One hit and a crit coming up naturally on the die. Shuttle palpatining for an additional evade, managing to not take any fire. Back to dials here on the closing rounds as the shuttle, quote-unquote, jumps to hyperspace to get as far away from Mark's brutal K-Wings as possible. Mark taking the win this round here in the top 4, going on to the finals. Dan knocked out by a very savvy opponent, simply just being unprepared to fly against this kind of a list, not having much experience against bomb-focused lists. Not prepared for how to deal with all the cluster munitions on the table. Another excellent game here at the Austin, Texas 2016 Regionals. Stay tuned with us. We'll be moving on to the final in approximately 40 minutes.